America, 1954. A year like any other until the disappearances began. One missing girl was tragic. 10, terrifying. But by the end of the year, 1,230 girls were gone. And almost no one was talking about it. They didn't all vanish from one town or even one state. These girls disappeared from small towns in the Midwest, bustling East Coast cities and quiet southern communities. Some vanished walking home from school, others from church. A few were last seen riding their bikes down familiar neighborhood, streets they'd traveled 100 times before. No bodies, no ransom notes, no answers. At the time, most newspapers reported the disappearances as isolated incidents. Police departments chalked them up to runaways, but some families didn't buy it. They remembered strange cars driving slowly past their houses. They remembered neighbors who suddenly moved away. And they remembered the creeping fear that settled over their communities like fog. The cases were too far apart to be considered connected. Or so they thought. It wasn't until years later, when independent researchers started digging through dusty police logs, archived newspaper articles, and missing persons reports, that the real picture began to form. This wasn't a series of isolated runaways. It was a pattern, a terrifying national pattern. The girls were all between 12 and 17 years old. Most were last seen within walking distance of home. And chillingly, many of them went missing during the same time of year, late spring and early fall, when the days were longer and the streets were busier. So why didn't the country notice? The 1950s were a time of post-war optimism, when America projected strength and family values. No one wanted to believe that something sinister was happening under the surface. And for those in power, acknowledging a wave of missing teenage girls meant acknowledging weakness. So they looked away. But now, decades later, we're going back. We're digging up everything they ignored, every cold lead, every buried report, every whispered clue. Because the story of the 1230 missing girls deserves to be told. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to figure out what really happened. If you're already hooked by this disturbing mystery, smash that like button and subscribe now. This is just the beginning, and trust me, it only gets deeper from here. 1954 wasn't just a year of disappearances. It was the year fear became normal. Families locked their doors earlier. Parents stopped letting daughters walk to school alone. Police stations across the country saw a surge in missing persons. Reports, most of them young girls, gone without a trace. But despite the mounting evidence, there was no national task force, no federal emergency, no coordinated response. Why? To understand that, we need to understand America in 1954. This was the era of Leave It to Beaver, white picket fences, and suburban boom towns. Post-war America was obsessed with order, reputation, and control. The nuclear family reigned supreme, and anything that threatened that image, like a wave of vanishing girls, was inconvenient. Easier to dismiss than investigate. In public, authorities offered reassurances. Most of these girls are just runaways. They'll come back when they're ready. But in private, some investigators were terrified, because what they were seeing didn't look random. Girls were going missing in clusters. One town would report a disappearance, and then within a month, 2 more would vanish from neighboring counties. Some were from strict families, others from troubled homes. Some were honor roll students, others barely attended school. There was no clear profile, no single motive, no consistent method. In one particularly haunting case from Mobile, Alabama, a 14-year-old named Clara Bell vanished while walking to her aunt's house 3 blocks away. The only clue? A neighbor who claimed to see a black sedan idling at the corner. That same description would appear in at least 9 other reports over the next 2 years. But these cases were scattered across different states, and the departments weren't talking to each other. There was no internet, no centralized database. Each town believed it was an isolated tragedy. Only the grieving parents and a few determined reporters began to suspect otherwise. And then the press turned on them. Articles accused desperate parents of exaggerating, of seeking attention. of distracting from real issues like the Cold War and school desegregation. Even in the rare cases where bodies were found, the investigations were quiet, incomplete, and quickly closed. This wasn't just a failure of law enforcement. It was a cultural choice to look away. Because if someone or something was hunting teenage girls across America, that meant the illusion of safety was shattered, and America in 1954 wasn't ready for that truth. Are you ready to go deeper? Then hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and stay with us, because in the next chapter, the cracks in the silence start to split wide open. By the time the count of missing girls crossed 1,000, something should have changed. But it didn't. There were no national headlines, no FBI task forces, just quiet fear and scattered whispers. But while officials dismissed each case as unrelated, a small group of journalists and amateur sleuths began piecing together something far more chilling, a pattern. One of them was Marjorie Callahan, a reporter in Kansas City. Her beat was small, mostly local crime and court cases. But after 2 girls from the same street vanished within 3 months of each other, she started digging. She found that police departments across Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma had nearly identical reports. Teenage girl disappears walking home. Last seen near a bus stop or parked vehicle. No signs of struggle. No follow-up investigations. Marjorie wrote a piece titled, "The Missing Girls No One Is Looking For." It never made it past the editorial desk. Her editor feared it would incite unnecessary panic. But she didn't stop. She reached out to reporters in other states. Quietly, stories began trickling in, from Georgia, Illinois, Colorado. Each time, the details matched, and something else emerged. In at least a dozen cases, a man posing as a talent scout or photographer had approached the girls days before they vanished. He promised modeling gigs, scholarships, acting careers in California. And then nothing. This wasn't just chance. Someone or some network was watching, selecting, and striking. But every time these threads were pulled, something would snap them shut. Evidence went missing. Parents were threatened. In one case, a school principal who raised alarms was mysteriously fired without explanation. The deeper people dug, the more resistance they encountered. And through it all, the official story remained the same. Runaway! No foul play suspected. This wasn't just denial. It was suppression. But the public couldn't be silenced forever. Local radio stations began taking anonymous calls from terrified witnesses. Tips poured in. Strange vans parked near playgrounds. Unknown men offering girls rides home. Flyers promising youth talent auditions that led nowhere. Some towns began warning families in secret. A few police officers risked their jobs to investigate quietly. The wall of silence was cracking, but slowly. Because the truth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unthinkable. If this story feels too wild to be real, hit that like button, because the more eyes on this, the harder it is for history to repeat itself. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. It's about to get even darker. Not every girl disappeared forever. A handful came back, but their stories were ignored, disbelieved, or worse, silenced. Take Annie Greer, a 15-year-old from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She vanished in the fall of 1954 while walking home from choir practice. Her disappearance made local headlines for a week, until the next girl went missing. But 3 months later, Annie was found, barefoot and dazed, walking along a rural road, 60 miles from home. Her story should have blown the case wide open, but it didn't. According to Annie, she had accepted a ride from a friendly man who said he recognized her from church. He drove her past her house, then onto a back road. She was taken to a farmhouse where 2 other girls were being held. Annie never saw their faces clearly. They were kept in separate rooms, never allowed to speak. She remembered being given drugged food and that a camera was set up in the room, though she didn't know why. After weeks of fog and fear, Annie managed to escape through a broken window during a storm. She told everything she remembered to the police. But instead of launching a search for the farmhouse or the girls still trapped inside, authorities dismissed Annie's story as hallucination brought on by trauma. They returned her to her family and closed the case. Her name disappeared from newspapers. Years later, Annie tried to write about her experience. Her manuscript was rejected by multiple publishers with the same reason: too disturbing for public consumption. But she wasn't the only one. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, a girl named Lena Bowers was found hiding behind a gas station dumpster. She told attendants she had escaped a man who kept her locked in a cellar for weeks. Her story, too, was buried. Police claimed she was confused and sent her to a sanitarium for observation. These girls weren't confused. They were survivors, and what they described, abduction, confinement, and surveillance, suggested something terrifying: organization. This wasn't the work of random individuals. There were too many similarities: the seduction with modeling opportunities, the presence of drugs, the deliberate separation of victims, and most haunting of all, the use of cameras. For what purpose? Blackmail? Trafficking? Something darker? We may never know, because every time someone tried to speak, the system found a way to shut them up. Even now, survivors and their families say they receive anonymous threats when they speak publicly. Let it go, one message warned. It's over, but it isn't over. Not if we keep digging. If Annie's story made your heart race, smash that like button right now. These voices were silenced for decades, and by sharing this video, you're helping bring them back into the light. Don't forget to subscribe, because in the next section, a small town starts connecting the dots, and the cover-up begins to unravel. In early 1955, the small town of Dover, Indiana, did something most others hadn't. They started asking questions. After 2 girls vanished within 3 weeks, both 14, both from the same school, residents began noticing strange patterns. A black car had been seen parked outside the school multiple times. Flyers for a so-called talent showcase had been passed out days before the disappearances, and both girls had spoken to a mystery man claiming he was from a modeling agency in Chicago. But instead of brushing it off like other towns had, Dover's community rallied. One parent, James Whitlow, was a Korean War vet, and he wasn't afraid to push back. He started collecting testimonies, photos, and timelines. He contacted neighboring towns. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. At least 6 nearby towns had reported girls missing under similar circumstances. None of the police departments had spoken to each other. No connections had been made until now. Whitlow brought his findings to the sheriff. The sheriff, already skeptical of outsiders, quietly opened a multi-county inquiry. For a brief moment, it looked like justice might be coming. Then everything stopped. The sheriff was reassigned within a week. His files were lost in an office fire. Whitlow's home was burglarized. Only his documents and maps were taken. Locals stopped talking. Fear settled in again. Something or someone had pulled the plug. But not before Whitlow made copies. He mailed them to 3 national newspapers. None published the story. Instead, they published obituaries for the girls, even though their bodies were never found. If this cover-up infuriates you, hit like and drop a comment, because even decades later, truth needs witnesses. Don't forget to subscribe, because Section 6 reveals what some say was the biggest lead of all, buried and forgotten. If there was one image that began to tie the entire mystery together, it was this: a pale blue van with no license plates. From Illinois to Arkansas, from upstate New York to Louisiana, reports came in describing the same vehicle. Light blue, slightly rusted, no rear windows. Always parked near schools, bus stops, or small-town events, seen just days before a girl would vanish. Witnesses described a man in his 40s, average height, always in a pressed suit. He'd ask directions, offer candy, compliment the girls on their clothes or hair. Some reports say he carried a camera. Others say he claimed to be with the National Youth Talent Bureau, an agency that didn't exist. Every time police tried to follow up on the van, it disappeared. No fingerprints, no registration, nothing. Years later, a retired Texas marshal named Clay Morgan came forward. He admitted he'd seen the van back in 1954, parked behind a diner in Waco. Something about it felt off, too clean, too still. He jotted the description in his notebook, but the report was never filed. Why? Because his captain told him, "Don't waste time on fairy tales." But Morgan didn't forget. And years later, when he joined a national missing persons task force in the 70s, he started to notice something disturbing. The missing girls weren't just from random places. They followed a trail. They disappeared along specific highway corridors, close to rail lines or trucking routes. Towns like Springfield, MO, Lubbock, TX, and Greenville, SC, all part of a distribution network in hindsight. These weren't coincidences. They were logistics. Clay tried to present his findings. He was laughed out of the room, but he wasn't the only one who saw the pattern. An investigative reporter in Detroit named Rosa Mendoza independently mapped 87 disappearances over 14 months. The result? A near-perfect arc from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. And guess what was spotted in more than half those towns? That same ghostly blue van. Rosa's article was scheduled to be published in a major magazine. It never ran. The issue was pulled before release. She was told there were legal concerns. Within months, Rosa quit journalism. She refused interviews. She's never spoken publicly since. It's as if every time the truth comes close to the surface, something clamps it back down. But these patterns, the van, the routes, the cover-ups, don't just hint at individual predators. They suggest something organized, something resourced, something willing to silence anyone who looks too closely. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to ignore the possibility that someone at a higher level didn't just fail to stop this. They may have allowed it to happen. If you're starting to see the bigger picture, smash that like button and hit subscribe. This story isn't just about missing girls. It's about the cracks in the system and who slipped through them. In the next section, we meet a whistleblower who almost exposed it all. In 1971, nearly 2 decades after the first wave of disappearances, a quiet man named Walter Rines walked into the FBI field office in Philadelphia with a brown briefcase and a trembling voice. He claimed he had documents, real ones, that proved the disappearances were not only connected, but that federal agencies had actively suppressed investigations. Walter wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was an archivist. For nearly 12 years, he worked in a nondescript government records facility in Virginia, processing everything from missing persons reports to military transport logs. But one day, while sorting files from the 1950s, something caught his eye. A sealed folder labeled G1230. It contained case files, newspaper clippings, and dozens of redacted memos referencing young girls, missing school records, and surveillance photos. Many of the documents had been marked with unusual stamps like not for review and privileged by order. The more he looked, the deeper it went. He started to copy documents, quietly, slowly, carefully. Inside the briefcase he brought to the FBI were a full list of 300+ girls whose names never made it to public, missing persons databases, photocopies of internal memos between federal and local, law enforcement discussing containment strategies, and most shocking of all, a faded photograph of what appeared to be a holding facility in rural Pennsylvania with what looked like dozens of girls in uniform gowns. According to his statement, Walter believed the disappearances were part of a covert transport and relocation program, possibly tied to illegal medical testing or Cold War-era psychological research. He couldn't prove the full scope, but he had enough to raise alarms. For a moment, it looked like someone might finally listen. But then, just days after submitting his evidence, Walter Rines vanished. Gone. No record of resignation, no forwarding address. The FBI issued no public statement. The original briefcase was never seen again, and when journalists later asked about the meeting, the Bureau claimed no such person ever visited. But they were wrong. In 1975, a journalist named Deborah Cohn received an anonymous package postmarked from Richmond, Virginia. Inside was a single page typed, "I tried." They watched. They erased the girls. Now they've erased me. Don't stop. It was signed. W.R. Deborah spent years trying to track him down. But no one, not coworkers, not neighbors, not even extended family, ever saw or heard from Walter Raines again. It's as if he was swallowed by the same machine he tried to expose. And if he was telling the truth, then this was never just a mystery. It was a system. If Walter's story chilled you, hit that like button and subscribe now, because his message is what keeps this story alive. In the next section, we examine a shocking connection between this case and a forgotten military base in Nevada. In the barren stretches of Nevada desert, far from Vegas lights or public roads, sits a location so restricted, even some military personnel aren't allowed to mention it by name. Locals called it Site Echo. It never appeared on any official map. But in the late 1950s, odd things started happening near a town called Tonopah. Black helicopters, supply trucks moving only at night, fences stretching miles through the sand. Some said they heard children's voices echoing from underground shafts. Others swore they saw girls in uniforms, watched closely by men in military gear. Most disturbing was this. The town's entire school enrollment dropped by 22 students in a single year. The official reason? Families relocated for work. But no one ever saw those families leave. Flash forward to 1976. An independent filmmaker named Arlo Kessler, known for his investigative documentaries, heard whispers of a decommissioned airfield being used for non-flight experiments. He and his crew drove into the desert, filming everything they could. What they captured was eerie. Long, unmarked buildings half buried in sand, satellite dishes pointed downward, and security personnel who showed up without sirens, without warning, and confiscated their tapes. Kessler was detained for 48 hours. When released, he was silent. He never finished the film, never spoke of the project again. His footage was never recovered. But one of his sound technicians, Eva Monroe, kept a journal. In it, she wrote, "We heard crying through the air vents, like girls trying not to be heard. It wasn't a lab. It was a prison." That base, Site Echo, was never publicly acknowledged. But a 1979 satellite image, briefly published in a scientific journal, shows a 30,000 SQFT compound in the exact location. Within days, the journal was pulled from shelves, citing national security concerns. What was happening out there? Some believe it was part of MK Ultra, the CIA's infamous mind control program. Others suggest it was used for genetic experiments, with abducted girls as unwilling participants. One former civil engineer, under the alias Rook, claimed to have worked on the underground portion of Site Echo. In a rare interview, he said, "We were told it was a nuclear safety project, but there were no radiation shields, just dormitories, female dormitories. It all sounds impossible, outlandish, until you look at the list of names from Walter Raines's briefcase and notice that 12 of the missing girls were last seen heading west, toward Nevada. And then you realize this wasn't just about abduction. It was about containment." Creeped out yet? Then smash that like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to follow the trail all the way to the end. Because next, we dive into the cover-ups and the terrifying reason this case may never be solved. By now, one thing should be crystal clear. Someone, somewhere, didn't want these girls to be found. It wasn't just police incompetence. It wasn't just bad luck. It was deliberate erasure. Let's break down the most telling evidence. Missing case files. Entire folders disappeared from local police departments in Oklahoma, Georgia, and Michigan. When families demanded updates, they were told their daughters' files had been misplaced during reorganization. In one chilling case, a mother in Kentucky was shown a blank file with her daughter's name, crossed out in red ink, and nothing else. Media blackouts. Dozens of small-town newspapers printed stories about strange vans, suspicious strangers, or multiple missing girls in the same week. But those stories were later removed from archives, both print and microfilm. Reporters were told the stories were too distressing or inaccurate. One journalist, Renee Ellis, found that every copy of a 1954 issue she wrote had been physically cut out from library records in 5 states. Anonymous warnings. Several families received typed letters saying, "Stop asking questions. It won't bring her back." Others got phone calls in the middle of the night. No voice, just breathing. One father said he came home to find his daughter's photo, once framed on the mantel, replaced by an empty frame. The message was clear. Forget her. Closed investigations. Cases were marked resolved with no explanation. A girl gone for 3 years? Suddenly found with no details. When families demanded proof, they were told records were classified. Some were offered quiet settlements by unknown representatives. Hush money. Then there's the testimony of Father Thomas Ainsley, a Catholic priest in rural Pennsylvania. He claimed he heard confessions from men involved in transporting young girls across state lines. He tried to go public, but died in a mysterious fire before he could speak. His notes vanished. And finally, a man named Malcolm Rudd, a former military contractor turned whistleblower, sent a letter to the Department of Justice in 1983. It read, "There's a vault in Langley that holds the names, girls, locations, transfers, but the cost of opening that vault is silence." He died of a heart attack 2 weeks later, at age 41, healthy, no history, autopsy sealed. So ask yourself, why would so many unrelated people, from priests to truckers, reporters to engineers, risk their lives to tell the same story? Why did so many records vanish? And why do the timelines always lead back to the same years? The same towns, the same descriptions? And why, after 70 years, is no official explanation on record? Because someone made sure there wouldn't be. If this has shaken you, if you're starting to believe, this cover-up runs deeper than we ever imagined. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share your theory in the comments. Next, we reach the final chapter, and it's not about what we know, but what we still don't. 70 years have passed. Names have faded. Faces have vanished. And yet, the echo of 1230, missing girls, still lingers in the silence of history. There are no memorials for them, no plaques, no government acknowledgement. For most, there were never even funerals, just a line in a report, a panicked phone call, a cold room where a mother sat waiting for news that would never come. We followed the threads, from forgotten files and military bases to whistleblowers, who disappeared just like the girls they tried to expose. We've seen the evidence of a system too broken or too controlled to deliver justice. And yet somehow this story isn't just about what happened. It's about what we allowed to be buried. In 1994, a young woman named Rachel posted anonymously on a fringe message board. She claimed she was one of the girls, taken in 1954, too young to remember the abduction, but haunted by flashbacks of sterile halls, cold hands, and other girls crying at night. She described a room with white tiles, a hidden door in the floor, and a name she could never forget, Dr. Keller. Authorities dismissed it as internet fiction, but a private investigator found records of a Dr. L. Keller working in military research in 1954, specializing in trauma conditioning and isolation therapy. After 1957, he vanished from public record. Coincidence? Or a crack in the wall? Today, amateur researchers still chase leads. Podcasts dig through files. Journalists retrace bus routes and newspaper clippings. Families post aged-up photos online, hoping someone, somewhere, might recognize a face. Some believe these girls are still alive, hidden, reconditioned, forgotten even by themselves. Others think the truth died with the men who orchestrated it. But here's the reality. Something happened in 1954, and it didn't just steal 1230 lives. It stole our faith in the system meant to protect them. It exposed how easily truth can be silenced, how fragile memory can be, and how dangerous it is to stop asking questions. So we ask, what if this wasn't about 1 year? What if it was a prototype? What if it's still happening, just more quietly? And if we look away now, what might we be helping to erase? This is where the story ends, for now. But if you believe their voices still matter, help keep them alive. Like this video to raise awareness. Subscribe so more people hear the truth. And comment your thoughts. What do you think happened to those girls? And if you want more chilling, real-life mysteries that history tried to forget, check out our next video, The Hospital That Erased Its Patients. Because some doors were never meant to be opened, but we're opening them anyway.